unleashed a human crisis unlike any that we've experienced in the last 75 years.
Meaning one side has too much, the other side will oppose it.
We've done a lot of things to create the imbalances that we have today.
COVID-19 has laid bare the systemic social inequities. Addressing these larger problems must become our priority.
We have to make sure that the economy actually works for the people.
It's not just about growth for growth's sake, but how we share that prosperity.
It is not sustainability or profit. It is profit through sustainability.
We have to reskill our people to be successful. And if they're more prosperous, the companies are going to be more prosperous.
The most important tools are education and technology.
Technology creates opportunities so that people are able to move to greener industries.
It's not about not knowing that we are in a climate emergency. It's about choosing to take action.
For that, you need to act decisively in the renewable.
Very clear today that the sustainable path is more attractive.
We can focus on the short-term benefit or look further to solve bigger issues.
We need unprecedented collaboration to create systemic change.
It means redesigning the instruments we currently have
on a completely different trajectory, and that doesn't leave anybody behind.
We are one community, and we have to remember that.
Good afternoon. I'm Andrew Ross Sorkin of the New York Times and CNBC, and it is a privilege to be with all of you today for a session entitled Accelerating Digital Inclusion in a Post-COVID World. If there is one big lesson of COVID, we have become so much more reliant on digital technologies that allow these type of conversations to happen and people to work and be together, but it's also created a gap. And I think we are all so aware of what that gap looks like and what needs to happen next to try to make the digital world more inclusive is the subject of this panel. I should also mention that today, the World Economic Forum is launching something called the EDISON Alliance, which is responsible and a response to this challenge in terms of what it's going to take to change this dynamic and make things more inclusive. Let me tell you, we are privileged to be joined by a remarkable group of people here today. Ajay Banga is here. He is the executive chairman of MasterCard. Shobhana Kamini is here. She's the executive vice chairperson of the Apollo Hospitals Enterprise. And Ralph Mupita is here. He is the group president and CEO of MTN Group, an emerging market mobile operator with 273 million customers in 21 markets in Africa and the Middle East. I welcome all of them. I welcome all of you to participate in this conversation with us. Just a quick housekeeping note. We're going to have a conversation here all together. And for those of you who are joining us by TopLink, when we are finished, we're going to have a number of breakout sessions, and so we hope that you will stay around and participate in those discussions. But I want to start with Ajay, if I could, to really try to help set the table, if you will, both for a description, if you could, of what the EDISON Alliance really is all about. I know it's a project that is near and dear to your heart and that you've been working constructively on, but also to help frame what this digital divide and digital gap really means and how we're going to solve it.
Well, thank you, Andrew, and it's a pleasure to be here with all of you. Actually, Shobhana is a fellow member of the board of the EDISON Alliance, so she can add a lot of value to this as well. Look, at the end of the day, you framed it well. This is all about the fact that while we've all embraced the digital world over the last year, coming out of the crisis, if anything, this has probably pushed digitization forward by a few years across countries and societies. The other side of that, unfortunately, is that the World Economic Forum actually estimates that close to 47% of people have inadequate or very poor accessibility to the internet. Now, that's caused by many factors, but as I've said in the first meeting we had of the EDISON Alliance, you cannot have the Internet of everything, which is what we are talking about on one hand, without the inclusion of everyone. You cannot have the internet of everything without the internet for everyone. And I think if we are not careful about that, Andrew, we risk exacerbating already fairly big gaps in society about the haves and the have-nots. If everything we do is accessible digitally, from healthcare to education to being included financially and socially, then if we don't have a fair level playing field around the access to this amazing technology, then that would be a very tough place for society to go in the future. So really it's in that context that we're talking about connectivity, the cloud, and services as being made available to everybody on a level playing field, so we all have the same opportunity to use this amazing technology. And the EDISON Alliance is the idea of bringing together communications players, ICT players, with others in these different fields who could bring value to the idea of how can we as a collective with public-private partnerships make a real difference to this issue of the divide.
Shobhana, jump in here and help us. I think the challenge is clear, but I don't think we necessarily have details yet to understand how big a challenge this is going to be, how expensive it's going to be, what kind of public-private alliance is required to get there, and what the timeline realistically should be considered.
Andrew, I think this has been in the making, and the EDISON Alliance is just, affirmation during this the COVID time of how, the whole world actually had to go digital to survive. So the platforms and frameworks we build today must be inspired by the powerful vision of what we can achieve in an inclusive, digital connected world. So the EDISON Alliance is timely and seeks to address issues of inclusiveness as well as cross collaborations. As Ajay said, it wouldn't have made sense if it was just healthcare or financial inclusion or education. We just need to, and of course the backbone of telecom. So just bringing all these cross collaborations together, working across not just industries, but in this, the government is super important. And everybody working together truly as an alliance, I do think that we can make a difference. And I think that we have some short-term goals, and we also have some very long-term goals. But I think that the vision is very powerful.
Just dig into that a little bit. When you say, what are the how do you think about the short-term goals relative to the long-term goals?
So I really believe that during this COVID period, geography has become history, and healthcare has become 24/7. And traditional healthcare organizations are now reimagining how they deliver care. And it's not just healthcare organization, but every organization now is thinking about healthcare in their agenda. And I think during the pandemic, if you see, we switched on 6 million users onto digital health. 50 million people actually used telehealth solutions in India, and the rise in China and all over the world, US, was way, way more. So I think, so what we've done is that at the same time, we worked in the marginalized communities where they did not have smartphones, and we actually set up telehealth with the Indian broadband. We put all those things together. We've been doing it. We did almost 3 million consults. So I think what's happened here in a short term is we can make this very, very inclusive. And you'll see that the cost, what the next thing, it's history becomes geography. The next thing is that the cost of care will really reduce. So, the metrics of how we count productivity, we used to say that India has only 1,500 doctors. For every 1,500 people, there's one doctor. Maybe that's a new productivity metric. Using digital health, we can even do better. And I think this is something that the EDISON Alliance will delve deeper into. It'll also work with governments to build health stacks. And I think that no one private company can do this. It needs an alliance of this nature. And we also recognize that without the government, we can't work. So I think it's exciting to be able to work together with them.
Ralph, you are in the connectivity business. And if there is one component part that's so required in all of this, it's the connectivity. So just walk us through what the challenge is to get the world connected, which is the backbone before we even are able to talk in any real meaningful way about some of the remarkable things that are going on in healthcare and fintech and finance and the like.
Andrew, thanks very much, and great to be on this panel and forum. I think the challenges around connectivity, remain, pretty significant for many in our markets, particularly in Africa and the Middle East. And just as a data point, Africa has got 1.2 billion people, of which 400 are experiencing the internet. So you're basically saying, 2/3 of Africans are not the challenge that COVID has posed for all of us. I think the one thing that we certainly see is that there is a need to accelerate the rollout of infrastructure. And as part of that, to actually develop not only the kind of infrastructure in terms of towers and sites, but also the device ecosystem. And talking a little bit to the issues raised up front, there are actually, quite big challenges of affordability, particularly in low income countries, in particularly Africa, the Middle East. And we need to find solutions for low-cost devices. We need to find, solutions to get those devices in front of school kids. Shobhana spoke about health, but I think in many markets, the big challenge is actually education, that children during the COVID crisis were not able to go to school. Those who don't have, but those who do have, were able to actually carry on and be on e-learning platforms. So there's a considerable amount of capital investment that's needed. But I think more importantly, there's a need for coordination between the private sector and the public sector to think about the short-term and the long-term goals that Shobhana spoke about.
Speak to the economics of it in terms of what the private sector can do, what the cost is, and what can be done profitably, and what can't be done profitably and may very well need to be subsidized by government.
Yeah, I mean, it's when you think about the challenge, and I can only speak particularly around the markets, emerging markets, Africa and the Middle East. I think what is required here is, firstly, creating the right kind of, competition and competitive structures across markets. Connectivity business is very highly capital intensive. As you all know, in the US, you have 3 mobile operators. Actually, in some of the emerging countries, you have 6 to 7. And that means that actually there's a lot of competition, but nobody's making the right economics to carry on investing at scale. So public, competition policy and framing aligned to accelerating digital connectivity is a seriously important. Now, when you come to the challenge of your question about, how much capital, I mean, you're talking particularly in Africa that you need, over $100 billion of capital investment between now and 2030 to actually break the challenge of bringing everybody into the digital economy. That's quite a significant amount of investment needed just for Africa.
Ajay, one of the other big components of this is the financial system, which in the developed world is here and is real and has helped a lot of people, but in less developed countries remains one of the big stumbling blocks. And even in countries, frankly, that are developed, you can argue that there is a disconnect.
Yes, Andrew, just before we get to that, a topic about developed and developing. We were just talking about this in the context of many developing markets, but the digital divide is here even in the developed world. So you can look at rural-urban infrastructure, or even within cities in America. The challenge about education that Ralph just brought out so clearly applies even to us here in the United States, in parts of the US. And so I would encourage us to remember that this EDISON Alliance can apply across the world in developed and developing. And the second aspect on education for a second is that to get people to engage with the digital world, you have to educate them of the power of the digital world, whether that is through engaging them with citizenship applications that allow them to engage with government as a way to get aware of this, or healthcare applications or education applications. View this as an idea of a journey where you've got to take them with you, and you have to create trust in the system. So even if you're well familiar with how to use this infrastructure, if you don't trust it, either for cyber reasons or data privacy reasons, and that could get us into a whole conversation about how you treat data, I think you run a very real risk of not tackling this issue the right way. Your question about financial services. My view has been for years, even before this topic of the digital divide, that this issue of people being disconnected from the financial system is real and here. And one of the biggest challenges there is people not having an identity. So while MTN, for example, does some outstanding work with helping to bring people the chance to use a mobile phone at their fingertips to do certain things, the fact is, till you have an account of some type where you can receive money, spend money, save money, and keep it, that doesn't allow you, without that, you don't build a real knowledge of your capacity to participate in the formal financial system. And I think India has done some interesting work as well around opening bank accounts for people using this digital identity. But the idea of a universal digital identity that is able and capable to be the foundation stone of providing access to financial services, this is really important. Doing it the right way is really important. I think that we miss that as we go along.
Let me just follow up on one thing you said regarding the developed and developing worlds. In the context of the developed worlds, who do you think should pay for this? In a time when there's even questions, frankly, about capitalism in the context of COVID and inequality and the role of government versus the role of business.
Yeah. You know, Andrew, my view is that eventually there is not enough money in government or philanthropy, no matter how well-intentioned they be, to make a big enough difference to this issue. You have to bring the private sector's capital, technology, and ingenuity to the party. You have to. We all need to participate in this for commercially sustainable reasons. You know, I've said this to you. We had promised some years back that at MasterCard, we would reach 500 million people around the world for financial inclusion. We've paid from that for our P&L, but we did that because it's part of our business model and it's in our own self-interest to help get people into the formal financial system. All companies can find a way to make sustainable, inclusive growth a basic part of their fundamental business model. Investor pressure, which is now building, will actually probably help to drive that point. But you don't need investor pressure, you need to do it. And I think, therefore, even in the developing world and the developed world, it's not going to be just the government's capability or the NGOs. It has to be the private sector as well. Without that, we don't get to commercially sustainable solutions in this space.
Shobhana?
I would add to Ajay saying that actually a digital solution, especially in health, works out more cost effective. We can go deeper and we can go further. So, and especially in the sectors of prevention. And, a dollar there gives you a 4-time return. So while Ajay really spoke about everybody coming to the party in the private sector with ingenuity, it's also the fact that we can do this at scale at a lower price. And I think that's super important in these overfed healthcare systems.
The one thing, Andrew, the one thing I could add to Shobhana's point, which I don't want to lose track of, is I think private sector innovation is key here. But you got to remember that innovation cannot go ahead of standards and safety and regulation. So we've got to just do this the right way and do it in a way that enables this divide to be bridged, but not just in a way that leads to more trouble later. That data point was one of those. I've been arguing for a while that we need a data and financial kind of a board, like the Financial Stability Board. We need a data and technology board at the highest levels of government that cares about what we are doing with our data in a constructive way, so people want to participate in the digital infosystem. That's the whole, we got to do this the right way. Right. There are no shortcuts here.
Shobhana, weigh in on this, though. In the healthcare world, the idea of making a profit, if we're being honest, is controversial. The idea of the private sector, to some degree, within the context of health is something that in many countries is debated, if not more so, if not more than that, and how you think about that. And I'd also ask how you think about capitalism, if you will, in the context of COVID and all of the efforts to create a vaccine, but what that means as we're trying to close this divide.
So I think the vaccine is probably the greatest example of government and private sector coming together. And it's a lot about the research and the innovation dollars that you put in. You can't do this unless you're willing to spend a lot of money. And I think that, like Ajay said, there's no government or philanthropic organization that can actually put in the amounts and the velocity, the ingenuity of what's required. So how do they get a return? I think that as you see, there are more and more institutions that are turning, that are doing digital health. You see Google and you see Microsoft, Amazon, and all the others that are thinking about healthcare. And as we continue to compete, I think you'll see the best version, as long as, like Ajay said, it is within the boundaries of privacy, that there's certain, and I think that's a bigger issue than whether you're really making money.
Speak to the privacy issue, though, because so many people who are watching this right now, I'm sure, are thinking, in a digital world, nothing is private.
Yeah, and I think that the EDISON Alliance should address that issue of while nothing is private, there are areas that have to become inviolate, that belongs to that person. And I think as we go along and get more sophisticated, now it's just almost everybody's getting into it, and it's not mature yet. But as we get more sophisticated and we start putting guardrails, so that's the importance of having alliances like these that can have dialogues with governments that want to do the right thing, and the more that we can have with them, and the better the world will be, because there's some we can take this science and do some crazy things as CRISPR and all these evolve, but and again you marginalize some of the people who can't afford these solutions to get better. So I think this inclusiveness is a very important agenda, and digital health, you can actually make a decent profit, which I don't think is bad. Right. But more than anything else, universal health is important.
Ralph, I wanted to talk just about innovation for a second, because in the world of digital innovation and connectivity, most of the big companies around the world are looking to do the new coolest thing. Very few of them are looking to do the cheapest thing in terms of how they're innovating and creating new products. And to create this or end this divide, somebody's going to have to innovate a phone, for example, at a remarkably low price that can do so many, if not all of the things that the Rolls-Royce of phones do. And how you think you can incentivize that in a private or a private-public partnership?
No, Andrew, some of that innovation actually is happening already. I think when we look at the way, the antennas that allow us to communicate, so, for much of 3G, 4G communication, we rely on radio access networks and antennas. And there's a movement to Open RAN. Traditionally, the models have been that, between the European vendors, Ericsson and the like, and you've got Nokia, I have Samsung, and you have the Chinese vendors, Huawei and ZTE, to name a few. But there's quite a fast-moving movement of Open RAN, where there is actually a much more kind of open architecture and modular approach to building some of the infrastructure we need. That will bring costs down for sure, and that is happening without any government incentive, but an understanding that the price points where a huge part of the world will not be able to afford the telecommunication services, or providers of that will not be able to generate the return. And on the phone, we basically need a data-capable device at price points that are at least somewhere between $15 to $20. Now, if we create a mass development of data-capable devices at the $15 to $20 price points, I think you can scale the connectivity and the digital inclusions of people potentially in Africa and the Middle East. So, device manufacturers, developers of telecommunications equipment are actually incentivized because there is still a market, a mass market, particularly in the developing world, for digital connectivity. And what keeps them out is that the affordability. In the US, as a data point, your average revenue per customer is probably $40 to $50. In Africa, you're talking about $4 is what telecommunication providers need to make a decent return. So we do need innovation, and some of that is coming. As I mentioned, Open RAN is one, and the low-cost devices that we're beginning to see. But we need much more of that going forward.
Right. Ajay, we talk a lot about how to end this divide and bring this gap closer. One of the ways some people imagine doing that is effectively creating decentralized finance and banking systems that effectively disintermediate companies like yours and the traditional system of finance. And I'm thinking, of course, of cryptocurrencies, which are the rage, and Bitcoin and the like. But I'm curious, when you think about that divide and the idea of disintermediating companies like yours that are profitable businesses, what that could do and how you think about that. Ajay, I think you might be on mute.
I don't think disintermediating us reduces the cost there, Andrew. I think if you look at our profitability per transaction, we're a very small proportion of the cost. I think the bigger issue is that there's a different topic there, which is does the blockchain, does this kind of a new technology enable a new dawn and a new way of reaching more people? And I think the challenge with the blockchain has been, because as you know, we are one of the biggest innovators on blockchain and central bank digital currencies. We are among the largest patent holders in those spaces. The work we're doing, the challenge is you need currencies that fit the role of a currency, as in transparent, stable, meeting local compliance. And that doesn't work very well if it's anonymized and decentralized to the point where no one can live up to those standards. But a central bank digital currency, which is supported by the fiat authority of a country and enables some of the friction to be taken out of the system, that could be interesting. I still believe it needs the commercial banks to be able to get to scale and also provide the right protection and buffer for the central bank from changes in the marketplace. But I believe that creating such an opportunity could lead to some interesting points in remittances of money, in cross-border flows on trade finance, for example. And I think those are the kinds of opportunities that companies like ours and others can help with. We're actually, my belief is that people like us, we may have card in our name, but in actual fact, I'm indifferent whether you transact with a card of any type or a direct account-to-account payment or a cryptocurrency or rather a central bank cryptocurrency enabled, a fiat currency enabled blockchain. My job is to offer you the choice, and your job is to be able to choose that in the manner that suits you. And that's the definition of these kinds of businesses that can bring our scale and our innovation to this issue. So I kind of think of central bank digital currencies as an enabler that we should all embrace and really examine how best to work with them.
Thank you for that, Shabana. Before we break into our breakout rooms, final word to you. If we have this conversation and get back together, hopefully in person, 10 years from now, what does this world look like when it comes to healthcare and the digital divide? And how much can we make it more inclusive, but recognizing that as innovation happens, innovation unto itself can oftentimes create its own divide?
So I think it's very difficult to actually look into the future, but I do think that no health player will not have a digital strategy. They cannot do it. Hospitals are going to shrink. They're going to become more care at home. There's going to be more access to people in the rural areas that they can just use a cell phone. And as more and more people, and I see in India, when you spoke about a cheap phone, they're actually trying to do this for with Google and Geo are trying to bring I think a $200 or less than that a smartphone, and I think that these will be the differentiators, that there are going to be more and more people who realize that you can't not be included in these, and the government will use this as a tool, because if you look at the government today, our government has 500 million people under the government health insurance. They can't do this without being highly digital and the way that they run through the processes. So I do think that the next 10 years we're going to see this leapfrog. The important thing is don't leave anyone behind.
Thank you. And thank you, all three of you, for the conversation. Ralph, Shobhana, and Ajay, we very much appreciate it. We're now going to move into breakout rooms. So we want to thank those of you who are on the live stream for being with us. And we will see all of you in just a moment.